Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining today's Sustainable Living Series webinar. Today we have Lisa Webb, and Lisa has been raising and tending to a diverse flock of laying hens on Wolf Island for about 12 years. And she's going to be covering topics like housing, health, hatching, broody hens, winter hardy breeds, and overall maintenance and workload, which will be helpful to those who already have their own flocks or thinking about starting their first flock. So without further ado, please welcome Lisa Webb. Thank you so much, Lisa.
You're welcome.
For joining
Thanks
us.
for having me.
And you are good to, if you want to share your screen now.
Mm-hmm.
Good to go.
Okay. I can know, oh, here it is. Okay, so I'm mostly going to have my screen up. So these will be my notes. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us for chatting about chickens today. And thanks, Marlo, for all the other talks that you've facilitated and for inviting me to give this talk today too. This is my ridiculous looking picture of someone who's a little bit obsessed with chickens. Oops, I'm supposed to change this. Hang on a sec to a different view. I'm just going to unshare my screen for a second so I can change the view here. Oh, I'm not going to be able to do both, I guess. So I will just leave it like this. Okay, I'll leave it like that. So I just wanted to say off the hop that I had grandparents who ran a subsistence farm, and definitely what they did, I think, would be easy to classify as sustainable. I don't think that what I'm doing is necessarily sustainable in terms of my definition, but I'm happy to talk about why I've done it and what it means to me and my motivations for doing it to sort of address the sustainability issue. First of all, I don't really remember exactly why I started with chickens, but the fact that I do have chickens and raise chickens speaks to my my resources available to me. I'm fortunate enough to have property, have resources, and do it because I want to do it, not because I have to. So there's a lot of privilege involved, I think, in my positioning here and what's allowing me to do what I do. But I did want, in many ways in my life on Wolf Island, I wanted to be more connected to the land that I was sharing with a whole bunch of other flora and fauna. And I wanted to be a little bit more connected to my food and have more of a hand in how it's produced, how it's raised and grown. And I wanted to be involved in the labor of it. That's pretty much it. People have very different motivations for getting involved in raising their own food. Some people like me are only in it for producing eggs. We don't eat our chickens. My partner is vegetarian and I'm just not really interested. They're members of our family, so we do it for the eggs. It's a lifestyle issue for us as well. We have a property that has really taught me a lot in the way of how everything is interconnected in terms of the trees, the soil, our vegetable garden, our animals, our use of the land, personally, recreation, and the hens are just a part of that. Some people want to raise chickens for meat or eggs for economic reasons. That is definitely not the case with me. I think if we did the math, our dozen of eggs would probably cost about $40. So it's definitely not an economical decision in our case. So as I say, there are a lot of different reasons that people get involved with wanting to have chickens. We have lots of friends who raise meat chickens, and I can speak a little bit about their experiences, but my personal experience has only been in raising hens. So whatever your motivation is, keeping hens can be really an interesting endeavor. There's a lot of things to consider. And one of them is choosing your flock, the size of your flock, the type of hens that you want. Climate is an issue. The amount of space that you have is an issue. Cost is an issue. Do you want just hens? Do you want roosters? Do you want to raise your own chicks? Do you eat your birds? Of course, all of these things are considerations along the way. This is a picture of our flock at a certain stage. This is from a few years ago. And some of my favorite breeds are represented here. And I'll get into the specifics of sourcing hens and stuff like that. But in choosing your flock, these are some of the considerations that it pays to think ahead about, for sure. The breeds is a really exciting, fun part of keeping hens, sort of choosing what breeds might be the best suited to your environment, to your expectations, I guess. Basically, there are a couple of main breeds that, or main classifications of breeds that people would consider. And one are the sort of heavy egg producers, which tend to be smaller birds. This is a leghorn, which is one of the most, is the most successful producer. Definitely you would expect about an egg a day from a leghorn. The other grouping of birds is dual purpose birds, and they're called dual purpose or hybrids, and they're sort of egg producers, but big enough to be meat birds as well. The vast majority of our birds are dual purpose birds. So they're heavy enough that there would be meat on them. And what a lot of people do is they keep dual purpose birds till their laying production goes down enough, and then they end up in the soup pot, I guess. Winter hardiness is a huge issue for us here, obviously. There are a lot of birds that are just not conducive to the cold temperatures, and as well as the humidity that we have here. And so we have pretty much limited our flock at this point, and any new birds coming in to winter hardy breeds. These are two great examples of a winter hardy breeds. They tend not to have combs. Well, they have combs, but they're not the typical single comb, as we call it, that has big points on top. And the reason for that is because those are very prone to frostbite. So winter hardy birds will almost always have either a rose or a cushion comb, which is tight to the head. So frostbite isn't an issue. The brown bird here, the partridge chanticleer, is even more winter hardy than the silver-laced Wyandotte, because it also doesn't have wattles, the two pink fleshy pieces under the chin. Those are not as prone to frostbite as the combs, but they can be, especially if the bird is drinking from a water and those get wet. Some birds also have more plumage than others, and so they will be more winter hardy, but the comb is actually the biggest consideration. This is another very winter hardy bird. It's called an Americana. It's one of my favorite birds. It looks very hawk-like. It doesn't have any wattles, doesn't have much of a comb, and it has a big mustache. Birds have about 8,000 feathers, so they're quite well protected from the cold. And in fact, while cold and things like frostbite are issues, chickens actually have a harder time staying cool in the summer than warm in the winter. This is another very winter hardy breed. It's a white chanticleer, so it's a different version than the brown bird that I showed you earlier. Both of these chanticleers are actually Canadian breeds. The partridge chanticleer, the brown one, was created in Oka, Quebec. Sorry, the brown one was created in Alberta, and this white chanticleer was created in Oka, Quebec. So they're both winter hardy. This is another breed that I'm quite warm and fuzzy about. It's called a salmon faverol. It's not a great picture of it. It's kind of hard to see. But if you can see, it has very feathered feet. It also has a very small comb and very small wattles, and it is very fully feathered. The downside to this breed in the winter is that if you have a wet winter climate, the feathers on the feet can get quite wet, which is, no one likes wet feet in the cold. So that's an issue for them, but they are a lovely, lovely breed. Temperament is another thing. While there's variation within any breed, certain breeds have a more docile temperament or a more flighty temperament, which is a term that a lot of chicken people use for birds that are sort of skittish. We really like docile birds because we like to be around our birds, and it's nice when they also like to be around us and aren't always running away from us. So that's a salmon Faverolles. There's some very unusual breeds as well. Sometimes they're called fancy breeds. The feather-footed, which is the one I showed you just previously. There are several feather-footed breeds. The Faverolles being only one of them. This is a Polish hen. They have very, very odd plumage, as you can see, and these birds actually require some feather trimming around the eyes. So most of the unusual birds require extra care. The birds that have feathered feet are more prone to something called scaly leg mites because of the feathers on their legs. So usually the more unusual you get, the more care they require, which is something to keep in mind. So there are lots of breeds. There are lots of breeds available locally in Kingston too. There are heritage breeders. There are a couple of large hatcheries where you can find different breeds. Where you get your birds is really important in my experience. Sometimes the larger hatcheries are a good place to go. I'm not too keen on things like Kijiji and getting adult birds from people that you don't know. Chickens carry a lot of diseases and a lot of parasites and things. And for me anyway, I don't really want to introduce too many things to my flock because it just means more health issues and more care required. There is a good hatchery in Prince Edward County called Performance Poultry, and we've had really good luck with Jason at Performance Poultry. And other than that, I would really recommend going to registered heritage breeders who really care about the quality and standards of their birds. And there are lots of them. There's a listing. I have a list of resources at the end, and there's some links to heritage breeders. What's next here? Talked about dual purpose and meat birds and layers. We don't have roosters. We have had roosters in the past, and we haven't really enjoyed having roosters in our flock. We have a lot of elderly birds in our flock. Actually, we feel sometimes like we're running a retirement home for hens. But because we don't eat our birds and because we have pretty high standards for their care, our birds tend to live a long time. And we really found that the couple of times that we did have roosters, some of the older gals were not very pleased about it and didn't want to come home at night because they didn't want to have to contend with the roosters. This picture actually shows, it's not one of our hens, but it actually shows something on its back called a saddle, a hen saddle. And what happens when you have roosters, especially if you have too many roosters, is your hens, or some hens, will get over mated. And when a rooster mates with a hen, they tread on the hen's back. Roosters have really magnificent claws, and they can do a lot of damage. The rule of thumb for my standard anyway, for if you're having roosters, would be 1 rooster to every 8 or 10 hens. But because a lot of people get day-old chicks, which are unsexed, they end up with a 50-50 or even a 60-40 split of roosters to hens, which is way too many to keep. And it's one of the main problems of keeping hens in a city, actually, because if you do get day-old chicks and they're unsexed, you're going to end up with lots of roosters, and there's no easy way to get rid of roosters. Anyway, so this is a hen that obviously had been over-treaded on its back. The treading removes the feathers and can damage the skin, and the hen saddle is a way to protect a hen's back. It's a bit of a compromising situation for them to be in, which is basically why we don't have roosters. There'll be lots of questions about this kind of stuff, I'm sure, at the end. This is again another picture of our flock from a couple of years ago. They were out enjoying some watermelon. And just another picture of them, free ranging outside. One of the fun things about having a variety of different breeds in your flock is all the different colors of eggs that you can end up with, which is kind of fun. So this is kind of a common day or a couple of days worth of eggs for us. It's nice around Easter. One of the main things I'm going to talk about today is your setup. We live on Wolf Island, so we have a fair bit of space. I know a lot of people who are interested in keeping chickens are probably in the city, and so more limited in terms of both space, but also regulations in terms of how many hens you're able to keep. And I think in the city you're allowed to have 4 hens and no roosters for the most part. This is our chicken coop. There are some really important main components to housing for chickens. Probably the most important is ventilation. Chickens give off a lot of moisture through their breath, but also through their droppings. Moisture is a very challenging condition for hens. They tend to have a lot of respiratory problems, or at least be very vulnerable to have respiratory problems, and too much moisture in their living environment is not a good thing. The general rule of thumb in terms of space is to provide 4 square feet per bird for your setup. And I put in brackets anticipate flock additions because there are often flock addictions. Having at least that minimum space per bird is really important. So we've talked about ventilation, we've talked about space per bird. Another really important issue is to have sunlight in your coop and in your run. Birds need to be exposed to natural light readily in order to lay properly and also to be healthy. Sun is also actually a great sanitizer, so it's important from a health perspective as well. Even things like the roost height. So the roost is the bar or the tree limb or the 2x4 or whatever that birds sleep on at night. And the higher it is off the ground to a maximum of about 18 inches, the further away they are from their droppings at night, which is a health concern for them. So there are all kinds of specifications that are really important to consider when you're thinking about housing. They need a place to dust bathe, so having some sand or dirt around and available to them all times is important. Birds don't need bedding. They roost on a roost, like in a tree branch in a tree. In a natural state, they would roost in a tree. A lot of people, and I started off this way for sure, using wood shavings or straw or whatever in our coop, which really tends to just harbor moisture and bacteria and be problematic from a health perspective for the hens, but also for us when we're in there cleaning. Someone that was a really important mentor to me in terms of keeping hens once said that, if you really want the best environment for your hens, then you should enjoy spending time in their home. And so clearly I kept this in mind when we built our coop. It's airy, it's bright, it's ventilated, and I have no hesitation going in there and cleaning or renovating or doing stuff like that with the girls. So that's important. I also, my partner is an architect, so that's why it's as beautiful as it is. Let's see. This was what I started out with, and I would never recommend to anyone. It doesn't have any of the features I just discussed. In this situation, a bird will be, you know, if you had 4 hens living in this type of housing, they would be breathing in their moist exhalations and the moisture from their droppings all night long. They have no secure place outside to go. It's very difficult to clean something like this, and it's just really frustrating. I regret it, and I don't like admitting that I did it, but that's how I started out with hens. This is the inside of our coop. It's sunny, it's fairly clean. We've got enough nesting boxes for them. They have roosts to sleep on. There is some art on the walls, I will acknowledge. And probably most importantly, it's filled with sand. As opposed to having something like bedding or like shavings or straw, this can be easily cleaned every morning with a kitty litter scoop. So I have my poo bucket that I take in there and my kitty litter scoop, and I can keep it very clean. And it's a great place. They always have space to dust bathe, which is really important for keeping things like lice and mites, not mice and lights, at bay. So this is a very clean environment. I also actually do things like spray the top of the sand and the roosts with hydrogen peroxide regularly to keep it as clean as possible. This is the front of our coop. It's important to have windows. It's important to have good ventilation. You can see where the roof lines are separate there. That's all ventilation running along that top roof line. We actually put in, well, my partner put in flaps that can open and close up there. So for example, it's really important to have ventilation in the winter when it's cold, because the humidity makes the perfect environment for frostbite. But if you get a big snowstorm, you don't want snow coming in there. So it's really important to be able to adjust things like your ventilation. Let's see. A mistake that we made was to put our entrance door on the west side. So it is facing the prevailing wind, which I wish it wasn't, but we've made lots of mistakes that we've learned from. It's another picture inside, just showing this is the front of the coop has a whole panel of ventilation for the summer. So that gets opened up in the summer so that there's a breeze coming in at the bottom that can go out the top vents of the coop to keep everything moving. It's kind of an odd picture, but it shows a couple of important features, I think. Our setup basically has 3 levels of protection for our hens. So there's the coop that is entirely locked up at night, and the birds are in there and they can't get out and nothing can get in. To the left of that, you can see sort of some glassed in area. That's the run. So that they have access, that's sort of the second level of protection. They have access to that when I open the coop up in the morning. I can keep that area closed so that they can be in there all day and still be safe from predators. The glassed in little gazebo part there is just an incredible spot, because when it's -20 but sunny in the winter, it's actually very warm in there. So it gives them a great option for being warm in the winter. They do not have access to food and water inside the coop. Their food and water is only in the run. So they are not sleeping at night in a place that has moisture or food. And that just keeps their sleeping area clean. It keeps it free of mice and rats and things like that, and keeps it dry. I haven't always done that, but that's something I learned. And then outside of that glassed area where the gate is, and you can see some chickens roaming around, and quite far into the back is what we call Green Acres, which is their least protected area. It is fenced in, but we have had a fox in there before. So that's where they are. As long as we're home or the dogs are home, they are allowed to have that full outdoor area. Food and water. So chickens need a constant source of balanced ration, as well as access to plenty of fresh water. Ration is basically their either lay mash or lay crumble or meat bird ration. These are blends that are scientifically kind of balanced the same way that, dog food or cat food is. There are lots of people who feed lots of other things to their chickens. We've definitely just found over the years that providing the balanced ration is kind of the way to go. We have chickens that are pretty old right now, that are 8-9 years old, and so we feel like we're doing quite well with that. We also have tried other types of foods. Foods definitely typically come in either a mash, which is a fine sort of powder, or a crumble, or a pellet. We found that some foods, the way that they were processed, the hens would eat parts of it and not others. And so we didn't feel like they were getting kind of their balanced ration. So we use something called a crumble. Birds are really messy with their food. And so we use something called a treadle feeder, which I'll show you in a little video how it works. It's really quite ingenious and efficient. And we also use something called nipple waterers, because their waterers can be really messy if they're open as well. You can get manure in there. You can get wild birds drinking in there. When chickens are dust bathing, they're moving the dirt around and it settles in the water and it can get really messy. So we've sort of learned a lot over the years, and these are things that cost money. They add cost to your setup, but certainly I have found that in terms of the workload and in terms of not worrying about my birds when I'm sleeping or when I'm away, these are things that are really worthy additions. Free-ranging is another issue. I think we all like the idea of seeing our birds running around and pecking at bugs and eating grass and that kind of thing. And I really like that as well. You saw several pictures of our hens doing that. They can really decimate your flower garden or your vegetable garden. So those are things to keep in mind. And they can also get into trouble when they're out there, not just from predators, but from things that might be lying around. Thistles even can damage their feed or whatever. So there are lots of considerations as to whether free ranging is something that people want to consider or not. We have a lot of strawberry beds on our property, and the chickens just go to town on those. So we are keeping them in their confined run right now, their big outdoor run, it's a pretty significant area, so they have plenty of space. People like to give their birds treats too, and one of the things that I think people really fall into the habit of doing is going online, and I've done it too, and looking for information. And a lot of people will like to give, there are lots of places that sell like dry mealy worms and stuff like that. And it's the same with our diets. You can have too much of a good thing. And so from the information that I've gleaned that I trust, it's good to sort of limit treats to fruits and vegetables mostly, and not give hens too much in the way of extra protein and sort of gimmicky things like that. And speaking of food, there's a lot of price difference too in terms of the foods that you can buy for hens. And we use an organic lay crumble, and the price of it has gone up 30%, at least 30%, since the start of the pandemic. So if you do choose to have those kinds of standards for your birds, it is not cheap. So I think the next is a little video. So this is a little video of the treadle feeder. We'll just give you an idea. So this aluminum box is filled with their food, and they have to step on that treadle in order to open it up, which is really nice because then wild birds can't get into your food, mice can't get into your food, because you certainly don't want to attract too much of that into your area for your chickens. So that's a treadle feeder and some nice chicken bums there. This is another little video. This is just related to food. So this is inside our glassed-in gazebo. I just took a week or two ago, I think. And I've actually attached a cabbage to a string. They were confined to this area because it was a bit of a snowy day out. So I like to give them something to do to keep them occupied, not just for the food value, but chickens, if they're confined and there's not enough space or too many hens in a space, or they're bored, they can start pecking at each other. So sometimes it's a really good idea if they can't get outside, just to give them something that they can do to occupy themselves, kind of like children. This is a picture of some of our little hens when they were pullets. So they were, I don't know how old they were here, maybe 6 or 8 weeks. And this is just an example of one of the nipple waterers. So you don't have open water that's sort of getting dirty and dusty, and wild birds are coming and pooing in it and everything. It keeps the water really nice and clean. The birds are attracted to red, so they learn very quickly how to use it. It just keeps things really neat and clean. This is a picture of the area between the coop and the glassed-in area. Again, this is, especially in winter and summer, this is a very sheltered area. In the summer, it's sheltered from the sun, and in the winter, it's sheltered from the snow and the cold and the rain. You can see that I have 2 different treadle feeders in there. And that's Gracie, one of our oldest hens, just munching down on some food. Here's a picture of me again, my chicken hat. I do have a chicken onesie that I was going to wear today, but I couldn't do it. Maybe another time. In terms of chicken health, chickens are really vulnerable to a lot of things, to temperature, to reproductive issues, to parasites, and all of the things that I've talked about, like housing and food and bedding and all those waterers. All of those things can really contribute to having healthier hens. We've definitely noticed over the years that the longevity of our hens, the overall health of our hens has improved as we've learned more and more things, more and more ways to look after them best. We tend to do health checks. I don't ever do them as often as I would really like to. We did them the other night, just so I could say that I'm up to date on health checks today. Probably most importantly, it's important to spend time with your hens, because usually if there's something going on, that's the way to see it. Spending time watching them, having fun with them, showing other people. We have at times even put a little trail camera in there to see what's going on when there was something mysterious happening and we weren't around to see it. We would put a little camera in there. But it is important to keep an eye on your hens. Things can go downhill pretty quickly with hens. Because they're flock animals, and they don't want to make the flock vulnerable. If there's something wrong with them, they'll try to hide it, because one sort of sick or disabled chicken will put the whole flock at risk. So it's kind of important to keep an eye on things. Generally, with a health check for me or for us, it's I hate to say this, but it's paying attention to their bottoms and their feet, both bottoms. Those are some areas that are good indicators of a chicken's health. If a chicken does have some issues going on, it's really important to isolate them. It's important to quarantine new chickens if you do bring adult chickens into your flock, which I don't recommend. But we have a setup, and most people who raise chickens have something that they can easily sort of put together if a hen is not well. This is a little dog run that we have set up in our mudroom for any time a hen needs a little bit of isolation or some TLC. It's warmer in there. We can keep them away from other hens so that they don't get pestered. Although our flock is pretty good about that. We can put additives in their water or food if they need it, and we can just keep a better eye on them. This is Feisty and Red. Or is it Blondie? I think it's Blondie. Blondie and Red. They were in here this winter. One of the things that we've experienced, we've kind of experienced most of the basic health issues that can happen in a flock. But a few years ago, our flock contracted a contagious, reportable disease, actually. We don't know how they got it. It could have even come from a nearby farm on the wind. It could have come with a couple of times that we did actually get adult birds and bring them and introduce them into our flock, although we've always quarantined our birds. But so our flock has a disease that they will always have, which makes them a little bit vulnerable to especially extreme temperatures. So in the slide, Feisty and Blondie were brought in because they were starting to show some signs. And it's something that's fairly easily managed, but because they're older birds, they're probably more likely to experience some symptoms now and again. This is another example of some healthcare. This was Red. She passed away quite recently, actually, at the age of 9. But she was also showing symptoms of this same disease that they have. And so I brought her in to give her a little Epsom salts bath and some scrambled eggs. And there's a friend of mine who breaks out into gales of laughter every time I talk about blow drying a hen. It is quite an event, but so sometimes they get brought in and given a little bath in the laundry tub here and given a little bit of extra food or extra care, and they actually quite like it. They'll just kind of sit there in the tub and really enjoy it. Raising chicks is really fun. Hatching your own chicks. A lot of hens, and this is breed specific as well, will go into a broody phase where they really, really, really want to sit on a bunch of eggs and hatch some chicks. It's a very strong drive for some of them. It's very annoying in the spring when you have a whole bunch of broody hens that are just taking up space in the nesting boxes, and they can get very aggressive. But it's really fun to raise your own chicks. You can either do that under a broody hen, or you can hatch eggs under a brooder, which is a heated space. We've done that a couple times, and that's really fun. We've also gotten day-old chicks from a hatchery, which is fun. They require a lot of care, though. And with most day-old chicks, if you get them in, say, April or May, you'll have them in your house or a heated space for a while, which can really get problematic pretty fast because they're very dusty and dirty, even though they're fun. This is just on the topic of chicks. This is when a few of our chicks had been quarantined and were just now able to mesh with the rest of our flock. These are the little young ones. I don't know, there's probably a problem with the internet here, but this is them all coming out, their first taste of freedom, and then some of the bigger birds there. Oh, this is, that's Cheryl, our bantam bird. She's not a young one, but she's small. And there they go. They're really a lot of fun to have. You know, they do have all their own little personalities and characteristics. There's quite a social hierarchy within a flock, which is really kind of interesting. And yeah, they can provide you with hours of entertainment for sure. Security is really important. Like I said, you know, there are lots of predators where we live. They're probably almost even more in the city with the number of raccoons and skunks and foxes and things that tend to be in the city. So there's security and there's biosecurity, keeping your flock safe from parasites and disease and things like that. There are lots of things that we can do to keep our birds fairly safe. Even other dogs and cats in the neighborhood are definite contenders for being predators for birds. And of course, now a lot of people probably know about the avian flu and that's an issue for a lot of people who keep poultry as well. Right now, it's a really big problem, and we've actually stopped feeding wild birds because we don't want them being around our flock. And maybe most importantly, our two little pups, Puka and Frodo, are really good at keeping predators away. Puka especially is good at seeing predators in the air. Frodo's great with keeping the foxes and the coyotes away. He's a very diligent protector of our chickens. And these are just a few resources. You know, one of the things with chickens is, in lots of ways, you're kind of on your own. You know, it's not like there are a whole bunch of chicken vets around, or you can't take your chicken to your family vet and hope that they're going to help you out. So you kind of have to learn where the resources are and who you can go to when you're in need of help. But a lot of it is doing things on your own. So we always have a health kit, and we have our mentors and our you know, experienced friends. There's a great resource called Canadian Poultry. They're a consultant firm. They're a firm, I guess, but they have poultry vets. I've consulted with them many times, and they're a fee for service organization, but they're really, really helpful. There are a couple of rural vets around that do have poultry vets, and that can be really helpful too. There are some online forums that are really great. The Chicken Chick she has very high standards for hens. So if you're really looking for very specific information about keeping chickens, I would really recommend following her standards. I wouldn't necessarily go to her for help, because she can be a bit nasty and judgmental, but she has great information. So that's kind of my spiel. I'm going to try to stop sharing my screen now if I can, but I don't seem to be able to. I'm having some technical difficulties here.
I think even if you leave it up, it could be good. The resources page. That was great though. Thanks, Lisa.
You're welcome. It's just a bunch of ramblings really, but
no, that was I did not realize all of that went into it. I mean, wow. It does really seem like part of your family, which I guess with all of that effort and expense going into it, it is family.
Yeah.
So does anyone have any questions? We got one comment that's an impressive coop. Oh, Megan, go ahead.
Hi, yeah, that was awesome. Thank you so much. Firstly, you should have worn the chicken suit. So I just wanted to raise that point. But I do have a question, and you might have touched on it, but do eggs ever get stuck? And how often does that happen?
Yeah, they do. I've never experienced it, an impacted egg. I've certainly read about other people having that experience. In 12 years, we have not had that happen. We had, sometimes you'll get an egg that has an underdeveloped shell. So it has a soft shell. We've had that happen a few times. We've had something called witch's eggs, which are really small eggs. There's something called lashes, which are really weird, like rubbery looking, Play-Doh looking sort of things, which are really disgusting. You have those once in a while, especially with young hens. You can get some really funky things with young when they're first starting to lay. And we have had an egg that did have a soft shell that needed a little bit of help coming out, but not an impacted egg where, there was risk to the chicken or anything like that.
Great, thank you.
Welcome.
And we do have a couple questions in the chat. I think Emma went first. She said, what happens when you get a group of day-old chickens and some of them are roosters, but you only want hens?
That's the big conundrum. If you look on Kijiji in November, you'll see a whole bunch of people who have free roosters for sale or free roosters. Everyone's trying to get rid of their roosters. It's something that a lot of people don't think about in advance. The couple of times that we did get unsexed chicks and had roosters, we were very lucky to find homes for them. But I think that's not very common. So if that's something that you're interested in, I would suggest a place like Performance Poultry. They have sexed chicks and they guarantee up to 90% accuracy. And the last bunch of chicks we got from them were all females. So it's pretty reliable.
And she also asked, have you heard of the deep bedding method that some folks do with hay or stray in order to keep their coop warm in the winter?
Yep. And I think it sounds like a really great method. The problem with deep bedding, as I understand it, is it has to be done accurately. So basically what you're doing is you're continuously adding straw or shavings to the manure in your coop. And if you do it properly and you turn it over enough, the temperature of that manure, because chicken manure is very high in nitrogen, so it's very hot, the temperature will be such that any parasites will be killed. If you don't do it properly, you're going to have a mess of bacteria in your coop. And I just don't have the confidence to do it. I think there's a lot of value in the method. I know other people who do it, but I haven't. I've gone for uber clean as opposed to methods that people used to successfully use in subsistence farms a long time ago, and it's coming back. It's just a fear. It's just a fear factor on my part that I'm not going to do it right because I don't have enough time.
Okay, and then Nancy had a question. If you don't have the space to have a separate area for food and water, what do you recommend?
Don't have hens. Honestly, waterers will always leak. Birds will always be messy. And if you get food and water and straw or bedding together, you're going to have bacteria and mold. And not only will your hens not be healthy, but if you're in there cleaning, you won't be either. I would never go back to having food or water in my coop, to be honest. Yeah.
And then she also had a part 2. Sometimes I get mini eggs. How do these happen?
You get what eggs?
Mini eggs.
Mini eggs? Well, when you have new layers, you can get small eggs. More often than not, older birds don't tend to lay the small eggs, but usually if you have new layers, it's not uncommon. You can get all kinds of funky, weird eggs when they're young.
And then Kim, did you have your hand up there for a question?
Yes, I did. Thank you. So thank you, Lisa. That was very, very helpful. We have Welsomer chickens because my husband grew up next to Welsum, the village in Holland, and so that's kind of he wanted. But anyway, so what I'm wondering is, do you ever have chickens that become broody or like more than once a year? All our chickens were molting and not laying eggs in the fall. And then they laid for about 3 weeks and then they stopped again. And one of our hens is brooding again. So I don't know, what is that? Do you have any idea about that?
It's not uncommon. I have a neighbor who has a hen that gets broody 4 or 5 times a year, even in the middle of winter. So this is, as I said before, when a hen really wants to sit on her eggs, she will not get out of the nesting box, well, once a day to poo and eat. She can get very aggressive. If you approach her, she sort of puffs up and gets a very nasty look on her face, won't let any other hens in. It's very annoying. So it's just, you know, it's just something natural that happens. And if it's becoming a real problem, you can break broodiness in a hen by putting her in a cage for a few days. In order to maintain the broodiness, they need to have a certain temperature. And if you put them in a cage where they can't sort of fluff up and have their breast warm, they can't continue the broodiness. They have to maintain a certain body temperature. So if you have them on a cage floor where they can't sort of maintain that warmth, you can break them of their broodiness. Some people will even put like a small bag of frozen peas or something under them, but I wouldn't feel comfortable with that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, and then we had one more from Nancy. Do you have one nesting area per chicken, or is a shared space okay?
I think, again, the rule of thumb is sort of 1 nesting box for 4 hens. You know, you can have 20 nesting box for 4 hens and they'll probably all use the same one. That's definitely been our experience. So sometimes we have 3 hens in 1 nesting box all piled up on top of each other. They're going to make their own decisions, but I would say we have 22 hens and we have 4 nesting boxes, and well, sort of 5, I guess, and that seems kind of adequate. So I think 1 to 4 is a good guide as to whether or not they will use them as such. They'll probably have a favorite.
Great. I'm just gonna end the recording.